This podcast is a member of WGPRN, WildGamesProductions.com.
In the world of darkness, vampires stalk the night, and from the shadows of the Requiem, a new covenant is found. The Camarilla comes from the edges of society to take back the night. And along with this Camarilla come new clans, the shadowy Mazambra, and the silent killers of the Assamites, and many more can be found.
Good evening, everyone. This is Lost Heretic. I'm here with Mallius again to talk about Vampire the Requiem, Vampire the Masquerade, and those awesome translation documents. Well, I'd assume they're awesome. They're not actually out yet.
But we're hoping sometime soon, right?
Yep. Eddie Webb said October, and I believe him.
Fingers crossed.
That's right.
So what are we talking about today?
Well, I figured we'd talk about how to take elements from Vampire the Masquerade and put them into Vampire the Requiem. I've got notes right here to take the Masquerade Camarilla and put it into Vampire the Requiem. I've also got some ideas for how to take Vampire the Masquerade Clans and put them into Vampire the Requiem. Now, to get us started, I've actually come up with some pretty radical ideas for taking Camarilla from Vampire the Masquerade and putting it into Vampire the Requiem. Now, I should probably preface this by saying that I haven't read Requiem for Rome, so I don't know too much about the Camarilla. I just know a few sentences from the Vampire the Requiem core book, so I'm not really sure if it's been covered in much detail in other supplements. However, my idea is to take elements such as the hierarchy of the Masquerade Camarilla and put them into Vampire the Requiem as a new covenant, which is created from the remnants of the Roman Camarilla and is now trying to take back territory in the modern Knights.
A new covenant?
Or, if you want to use the Masquerade term, you call it a sect. It's a bit different from a covenant that you see in Vampire the Requiem. It's much more intertwined, it's much more global, and as we'll get into, one of my ideas is that the Camarilla is able to communicate easily from city to city by the use of thaumaturgy.
Wow, so they have somewhat of a global network.
Exactly, which is much different than the isolationism presented with the covenants in the core Vampire the Requiem book.
Yeah, they're all stuck in one city, sort of stagnating there.
Exactly.
This is much more than just a simple covenant. This is a movement of sorts.
Even more than a movement, it's more of an army. So, taking the Camarilla and putting it into the modern Requiem setting, my recommendation would be to take the Masquerade Camarilla's overall hierarchy and insert it as a new covenant or a new sect. You make the remnants of the Roman Camarilla that have survived until modern Knights, perhaps by hiding out in corners of the world where it won't be noticed, maybe even going towards Constantinople in the Latin Roman Empire, and maybe they came out of there. The Camarilla, as presented in the modern Knights of Vampire the Requiem, would be an expanding empire. They'd be taking over cities by more than just influencing mortals and other vampires, but by slaying key kindred in the city's knight society. These captured cities would treat members of other covenants as second-class citizens, having them constantly watched by retainers and monitored through thaumaturgy. So, how does the Camarilla take over all these cities? Well, the Camarilla has sieges which are led by archons, and these are lieutenants of the inner circle who have been made unbondable by thaumaturgical rituals. And these archons then blood bond coteries of vampires and have them infiltrate a city's society to destabilize and remove powerful kindred. So once a city has been taken, they have thaumaturgical rituals done to prevent Covenant kindred from leaving the city, mostly by just having them monitored and kept track of. And this effectively enslaves them to the Camarilla. So once the city has been taken, thaumaturgical rituals are put in place to prevent Covenant kindred from leaving the city, which will effectively enslave them to the Camarilla. And the Camarilla also puts strict laws and complex traditions into place, which will give the Covenant kindred, of course, less freedom. Each city is then controlled by a Justicar, who is supported by a coterie of blood sorcerers known as the Tremere, who for some reason share a name with these soul-sucking liches from the Mage of the Awakening game. These Tremere form his political council, as well as any archons he has ordained. Now, the Camarilla, when used in this way, bring in a number of interesting aspects and themes that were present in Vampire the Masquerade, but weren't present in Vampire the Requiem. A few of those are having a hot war between vampire factions, which are actively vying for territory. Because when the Camarilla starts making aggressive acts at the city, the different covenants are going to try to band together to kick them out. Even the Invictus, which are somewhat based off of the old Camarilla teachings, are going to oppose them.
I would imagine that the other covenants would be outright volatile as far as a old group of vampires masquerading as the remnants of the Camarilla, coming to take control. I don't think they would stand for that.
Even the Invictus that might like this kind of structure, they're still going to oppose them because they have power in the city, and these guys are trying to come in and take that power and that influence.
Well, of course, and on top of that, it wasn't their idea to do it in the first place. Of course they're going to oppose it.
That's very true. Now, another idea is having a global vampire conspiracy, not just these scattered fractious covenants, but having one organization which can communicate with itself and lead organized strikes or organized influence around the world. And that's what the Camarilla is, because of their use of thaumaturgy, which is another point. The thaumaturgy as presented in Vampire the Masquerade has different paths and rituals, and in Vampire the Requiem, you only find the ritual-based blood magic. So that's another thing that you can carry in. And path-based blood magic, as presented in Vampire the Masquerade, is really powerful. You can do a lot of ridiculous stuff in there, whether it's just flinging giant fireballs or completely controlling the weather.
How would you suggest doing this? Like, would you just go straight out from scratch and use the discipline creation methods found in the Requiem book, or would you use examples of the Kruak magic in various books to utilize this, or how would you go about doing this?
I would actually use Second Sight.
Would you tie it in with some of the ideals of disciplines like spending blood to use the abilities, or would they be innate, like in the Second Sight book?
You probably would have to spend blood. I've not read Second Sight, so I don't know all the mechanics that are involved, but that seems to cover a wide variety of powers that thaumaturgy was able to use in Vampire the Masquerade.
A note on the Second Sight book, it does cover a vast amount of metaphysical abilities, but it's almost like a watered down magic. It's more of a magic for a game that you might not necessarily want the huge drastic effects. As long as you keep that in mind, you can tweak it definitely to utilize it, but it might you'll have to add on the blood costs, and you might want to strengthen the abilities just a little bit.
Good point. The final point I have is that it would be very interesting to have a sect or covenant that can maintain communication between cities, because that's going to make your chronicles much grander in scale. You're not going to be bound to just one place. You'll be able to easily move around and find out the politics of these different regions.
So like a group of nomads who work as almost like the postal carriers of the Camarilla.
You could also have the coterie be a group bloodbound to one of these archons leading a siege. And as they take one city, they might have to go scout out another region.
Do some infiltration work.
Precisely.
Very interesting. Gives you a lot of covert opportunities. Sounds really great for Maquette and Gangrel vampires.
Yep, definitely.
So how are the Covenants going to defend their cities from these interlopers?
Well, that's a very good question. As I mentioned before, the Camarilla's main tactic is infiltration. So Covenants are going to have to be very, very leery of new vampires coming into the city. And perhaps also Covenantless vampires, those loners that you might find. They're going to be very distrustful of them.
In the games that I've played, a lot of the Covenantless vampires were looked upon as threats or useless. In fact, there's actually a term, and it's not lost from Old World of Darkness to New World of Darkness. It's not as predominant in the New World of Darkness, but if you look in the lexicon for the old language, elder vampires will refer to vampires without a platform as caitiff. And this is almost like a derogatory statement. If you don't have a platform as a vampire, then you are a threat, if not a insidious element to kindred society, the Requiem in general.
Or just a punching bag.
Yeah, that's very true. Indecisive punching bag.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, the old caitiff scapegoat.
So the Covenants are going to have to keep a tight control on the populations in their city. So how effective do you think this would be a defense against Camarilla insurgency?
It'll be pretty effective, at least in the beginning. But as Kindred start losing contacts, losing influence in the city, that's when you know something's really up. An excellent book to check out for this exact topic of city sieges is the Vampire the Masquerade book, Midnight Siege. It covers different tactics that Kindred use to influence cities that they don't control and to gain a foothold and then finally take them.
I've never read that book, but do you think the Gilded Cage might come into use in this area too? I hear a lot of good things about that book as far as...
It might. Gilded Cage is all about how Kindred play games of influence, which is definitely important because, as I mentioned, one tactic that could be used is to infiltrate the society and then play games of power and maybe even have one of these members of the Camarilla coterie become friends of the city. That'd be a very easy way for the Archon to come in and just take over the place.
I don't know if that would be easy, but it would definitely be a spearhead tactic.
Yep, precisely.
Infiltrate, cut off the head of the ruler, and take his place.
Yep, definitely. Well, that's all I've really got to say about this. Do you have anything else?
You've mentioned elements of the Tremere blood magic coming into play. You've mentioned nomadic vampires, which I also highly recommend the book Nomads. I don't know how overlooked this book is. I didn't really know about it until I went searching for it, but that I actually, I found it somewhat useful. It gives you a lot of things to think about as far as vampires on the road. So if you have Camarilla insurgents traveling from one city to another, or a coterie traveling from one city to another, then it might be good to give that book a little bit of a read up just to see what you might have in store. Would there be any mechanics that you would suggest using to create something like this in your story?
Any new mechanics? I can't really recommend anything off the top of my head. However, I'm sure there's something in Damnation City.
Guaranteed. It's another really highly recommended book from what I've heard. I haven't read through it myself, but I'll definitely have to give that a go through.
Yeah, I haven't checked it out either, but it's on the to-buy list.
It's a huge book. Have you seen that? It's like,
oh, yeah, I have.
It's really thick.
Yeah, that's a bludgeoning weapon.
Yes. You could club a baby seal. Other than the Tremere controlling abilities through the blood, pretty much everything to create this in your game is already provided with the layout in Vampire the Requiem, and there's plenty of source books. What was it, the Night Raids book?
Yes, Midnight Siege.
Would there be any other books you'd recommend from the Masquerade, just to summarize for creating something like this?
Well, just to get some more ideas, you might actually want to look at the Guide to the Camarilla. I'm sure there's some other functions of the sect which could be transferred over that I've not considered.
This is a very conceptual approach to incorporating the Camarilla into your game. If anyone gets to give that a shot, definitely let us know how it goes in the forums.
All right, I think we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back and talk about clans.
Oi, chummers. This is Zen Dead, Sysop over at the Hidden Grid, a Shadowrun podcast. I see by the confused look on your persona that you haven't been over to get your updates for Shadowrun. From product reviews to campaign building and management to interviews. So punch the code, crack the ice, and sleaze in to keep soda, chummer. You can find us at www.hiddengrid.com.
Well, I had two basic points I wanted to bring up about clans, and that's the fact that in Vampire the Requiem, we look at the 5 basic clans, their archetypes. And these archetypes are defined by their weaknesses, because really when you look at them, the Mekket, the Ventru, the Gangrel, they're all a weakness and a discipline spread.
So, how do these archetypes work out? Well, if you look at the Nosferatu, they are quite obviously the overt monsters. The Deva are the sensual killers and stalkers of society. And the Ventru are the lords of the night. If you take a closer look at the Nosferatu and analyze their weakness and disciplines, you'll see that they have 3 core themes to them. They use fear to unnerve others, they are able to hide using obfuscate, and they also have their sheer strength to back up their monstrosity.
Now, in Vampire the Masquerade, the clans are stereotypes. And the key thing that really defines them is the picture on the 2-page spread. That's right, Theobald with a shotgun, that Gangrel chick with the baseball bat. Man, I really always wanted to play those guys. But that's a big challenge when you're trying to take a clan from Vampire the Masquerade and put it into Vampire the Requiem. You're going to want to adjust it so that it really fits the themes of this game.
So, are you suggesting providing a weakness and a discipline spread to Masquerade clans, and then to sort of update them to Requiem?
I think that's a good idea. Now, let me give you an example. The Lazambra in Vampire the Masquerade are the Clan of Shadows. They've got a very much Lords of the Night feel to them. And the way that I would put them into Vampire the Requiem to make them unique and interesting would be to give them the archetype of the higher predator, the vampire who is far above being immortal. And they would probably have the same discipline spread, obtenebration, which can be found in Vampire the Requiem. You check Bloodlines the Hidden for the Kai bit, and they would have a weakness, which would be that they are more likely to frenzy if a mortal is antagonizing them, and if they are very hungry, if they're low on blood, it's much harder for them to resist feeding from a mortal.
Okay, so they're more susceptible to the trials of immortality and the separation between themselves and the mortal world.
Yep, you've got it. So that's not really covered by any of the other clans, but it's definitely an integral theme in vampire fiction.
Would you suggest making this like its own clan? Like, I guess it's whatever you want to do in your game, but as a suggestion, would you suggest making this a clan in and of itself, or maybe taking the Ventru and applying a bloodline to them, a Lasombra bloodline?
I would probably make them their own clan. I think that's really the point of this segment, is to take clans from Vampire the Masquerade and put them in to Vampire the Requiem as close as possible, yet still have them be unique and interesting and fit into the archetype definition.
All right. Yep. It's a great way of going about it. Of course, we want to sort of bring back as much of the glory of the Masquerade clans into Requiem without tailing it on to something that already exists.
Now, another clan that I was considering was actually the Assamites, which we discussed in the last show. Now, I would probably keep their Masquerade discipline spread, give them Celerity, Obfuscate, and Quietus, which would be a silence discipline in Vampire the Requiem. But I would make their archetype the Silent Killer, which means not only silently killing vampires by use of their stealth and silence, but also of mortals. Now, to accentuate this, I would give them a weakness that they cannot be seen feeding by mortals. And if they are noticed, then they'll actually begin vomiting the blood that they just fed on, which would be a horrendous masquerade breach.
Vampire bulimics.
Yeah. But that brings in a very interesting weakness and a very interesting element. And one thing to note is that feeding on a kindred would not cause this, which means that you might get lots of Diabolarists, which will keep an element that they had in Vampire the Masquerade.
If you're strong enough to take on another vampire, because you got to remember the vampire kiss doesn't affect other vampires. You're full on ripping into another vampire's throat, and they're aware of it. So the Lasamra now, if we bring them over into the Requiem, what disciplines would you probably give them?
Obtenebration, Potence, and Dominate. Those are their Masquerade disciplines.
Okay, and you would give them the Requiem counterparts?
Yep.
Then we're looking at their weaknesses. With all this strength and the mastery over shadows with Obtenebration, they have to actually live their vampire lives in this sort of covert, in the shadows sort of state. Like, they cannot be seen feeding, okay, by mortals. Like, to be seen feeding by mortals is like, it's bad enough if it's recognizable as vampiric feeding, but most of the time, it can be passed off as, a kiss on the neck or what have you. Usually it's not that visible, unless someone knows what they're looking for. But in this case, you have a vampire that feeds, and then if they notice that they've been seen by a mortal, or is it by mortals or is it by just anyone?
Just mortals. So they can be in Elysium, and if there's just one mortal right there, they can feed all they want. Vampires don't care.
So there's like this mystical sort of connection with being stealth and being connected to the shadows that you have to be seen is enough to cause a vampire to purge all the blood that they just ingested. Would this cause any damage to the vampire, or would it just be a visual display?
I don't think it would cause any damage. It would just be visual.
That is quite a dramatic negative side effect of being a Assamite. It's not so much like, if you do this, you're going to take this point of damage. It has sort of a dramatic effect in the story that it could, in fact, cause masquerade breaches.
Yes, exactly.
Or just extreme discomfort, to the very least, for your vampire.
Indeed, and that's one of the things that Vampire the Masquerade was really known for. Some of these elements, some of these ideas, some of these weaknesses of vampires were pretty drastic. For example, there was the Nagaraja bloodline, which had to consume a health point of flesh every day in addition to blood.
Oh, and there's also the Salubri, whose weakness allows them to only take blood from those who give it willingly, which has a whole lot of problems associated with it. So that's about all I've got to say regarding bringing Masquerade Clans into Vampire the Requiem. And I'm sure with these few basic ideas, it's going to be pretty easy for people to port the other clans over. So now that my mic is working, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back.
You are in a dark, cold dungeon. You see a wooden door in front of you. I open the door.
The door is locked.
Fine. Then I unlock the door.
You have unlocked the door.
Okay, now I open the door.
The wooden door creaks open and there, standing in the hallway, is a goblin.
Finally, something to fight. I fire an arrow at it.
The goblin eats your arrow.
I throw a rock at it.
The goblin eats the rock.
How about I just punch the thing?
The goblin bites your fist. You take 2 points of damage.
Ow! I cast magic missile.
The goblin cries out in pain and the body crumples to the floor.
Loot the body.
You discover a piece of parchment. Unraveling it, a voice emanates from it.
For more things to throw at goblins, visit swingandamiss.net.
Listen to our actual plays at swingandamiss.net.
Alright, Mallius hit the road, so it's just me. To tie up a few loose ends, I think this is going to be the last Requiem for a Masquerade episode for a while, but Mallius and I are pretty excited to talk about this a bit more. However, we understand that there's more to the world of darkness than just vampires. One thing coming up during this is a video bookbinding tutorial that I'm trying to put together. Should be pretty interesting, and it'll help people fix up their old World of Darkness books, and maybe even some of their new ones. So, until next time, this is Lost Heretic signing off.